I am hearing from seniors constantly about how they are being met with suggestions of death rather than offers of healthcare. Most recently, I was visiting Vancouver Island, and that really is the epicenter of euthanasia. And so it didn't take long to receive these stories of seniors who, even upon arrival to a hospital or upon going to see their family doctor, were met with the suggestions that maybe they would be better off dead. And who can trust their doctor in that climate? It's just crushing.
Canadians are sold this idea that medical assistance in dying, acronym MAID, is all about compassion and choice. But the more stories that come out, the clearer it becomes. This isn't compassion, it's coercion disguised as healthcare. And with an aging boomer population, the government has stopped hiding the real motive. This is state sanctioned euthanasia designed to reduce burden and save millions in healthcare costs. Seniors showing up for back pain are being offered lethal injections in the emergency room. Families are watching their loved ones get steered toward death instead of real care. And the system is literally falsifying death certificates to hide the real toll. Today, I'm pulling the most powerful comments from my conversation with Amanda Achtman, founder of Dying to Meet You and ethics director for Canadian Physicians for Life, because her frontline work exposing this nightmare needs to be heard everywhere. This is how Canada went from exceptional circumstances to 1 in 20 deaths by lethal injection. Let's hear it from Amanda just how tragic the normalization of euthanasia has become in this country.
It is really devastating because personally, I am hearing from seniors constantly about how they are being met with suggestions of death rather than offers of healthcare. And I travel across Canada. Most recently, I was visiting Vancouver Island, and that really is the epicenter of euthanasia. It is the euthanasia capital, most precisely as a region. And very often I was hearing of so many people who are shattered by the loss of their friends and neighbors to euthanasia, given how ubiquitous it is there. And so it didn't take long to receive these stories of seniors who, even upon arrival to a hospital or upon going to see their family doctor, were met with the suggestions that maybe they would be better off dead. And who can trust their doctor in that climate? It's just crushing.
Exactly, crushing. These aren't fringe cases anymore. This is everyday medical care in parts of Canada. And when you have a story like 84-year-old Miriam Lancaster, it proves the whole compassionate last resort line is a lie.
I am 84 years old, and a year ago, an amazing thing happened. When I got out of bed one morning, I was suddenly in excruciating pain, so much so that my daughter came running in from another room. She called an ambulance. Off I went to the Vancouver General Hospital, and I was approached by a young lady doctor who the very first words out of her mouth is, "We would like to offer you MAID." I was taken aback. That was the last thing on my mind. I just wanted to find out why I was in pain. I did not want to die. And I was a month in hospital, came home and recuperated nicely enough that I could take some trips. Off I went last year to Cuba before the problems today in Cuba. And then just recently, I have been to Mexico and Guatemala. So my recovery has been amazing, and there was no need for MAID to even be suggested.
We all have experiences where we ebb and flow in our wellness and in our real need. And so for Miriam, she came upon this time of need, and after a month she recuperated, and as you mentioned, was able to go and do all of these travels to Mexico, Cuba, and Guatemala. And in fact, she's traveling again right now, even as her story is going viral. It's been picked up by tons of outlets around the world, translated into other languages, and people love the story because life wins. People love stories of resilience and hope. We are not made for death. We are not made for the defeat of euthanasia. And I am convinced, and I have hope, that this is not going to last. So I'm constantly exhorting the seniors, especially to whom I speak, don't go down this path. You deserve so much better, and I'm going to be fighting for you as much as I can.
Ultimately, life wins. That's the message the euthanasia lobby never wants you to hear. And with stories like Miriam's going viral worldwide, plus provinces starting to push back, we might actually be at a tipping point. Amanda touches on the cultural reckoning that's needed to rein all of this in.
The international scrutiny is certainly helping, and we're seeing other jurisdictions reject euthanasia and assisted suicide. Slovenia just had a referendum and overturned assisted suicide there. Scotland just voted against it as well. And so step by step, we are seeing a cultural shift. Yet still, Canada remains the cautionary tale. Yet within Canada, we also had the first piece of positive, life-affirming legislation, a step in the right direction, with the Alberta Framework, which removes so-called Track 2, the disability track that cuts life short even for those who are not imminently dying. And so there are some other measures, and these important measures demonstrate that Alberta is willing to defy the national trends with respect to euthanasia and insist on better for Albertans. So I think as provinces demonstrate different approaches, we're going to see that citizens want healthcare, want life, want a doctor-patient relationship that is positive and constructive and not to be met with suggestions of death. So I think the rival approaches across jurisdictions is a basis for hope about what the future holds.
Alberta showing some spine is great, but the federal machine is still cooking the books to hide how big this thing really is. Amanda breaks down the death certificate changes that falsify MAID data.
I'm glad that you use the word changes because this is a change and it marks a departure from original policy perspectives. I'd like to point out that an excellent investigative reporter, Alexander Rakin, published a study called From Exceptional to Routine, and this was published by the think tank Cardis. And in this study, he cites the 2017 Health Canada recommendation that death certificates state the immediate cause of death as the toxicity of the drugs administered for the purposes of a medically administered death. That's the recommendation. And yet, with the Ontario College of Physicians and Surgeons, we're seeing that when completing a medical certificate of death for a person to whom MAID has been administered, the protocol, the recommendation is that the illness, disease, or disability leading to the request is to be recorded as the cause of death, and the certificate cannot include any reference to MAID or the medications administered. This is quite simply the falsification of medical records, the falsification of death certificates. This matters because it undermines reporting. It cuts out the opportunity to have recourse to review and scrutiny of these deaths, and it minimizes the paper trail because the data of MAID deaths is still collected and reported nationally by Health Canada, but without this second layer of accountability on death certificates to corroborate the death numbers, there is a gap potentially in the data.
When the true causes of death go unrecorded, it undermines real, meaningful research, limiting reliable data, distorting statistics, which delays real solutions. In its place, a ghoulish practice of state-sanctioned euthanasia persists, and, as Amanda argues, is enabled in part by a medical culture that has drifted from its core principles of the Hippocratic Oath, as evidenced by a euthanasia doctor's own memoir.
This is in the euthanasia doctor's own memoir, in which she says, "Assisted dying was certainly unusual. No doubt I was intrigued by the unknown, but it was much more that drew me in. I didn't see assisted dying as ending someone's life. The underlying illness and suffering were doing that. I understood it more as facilitating someone's wishes, and it seemed to me that a healthcare provider might be the right person to do this work. Certainly, as clinicians, we were familiar with the medications. We knew the healthcare system and we understood the illnesses that came before the end stages of disease. But it was a monumental shift in philosophy for many within the medical community. We were always taught to, first, do no harm, and helping end a life was always assumed to be a harm. But to me, and now in law, in certain specific circumstances, it wasn't harm as much as help." And so there we see the complete inversion of the Hippocratic Oath, the complete inversion that even she is recognizing as a massive departure from traditional medical ethics.
So how did we get here so fast? Amanda nails the trajectory and the real reasons people are asking for MAID, and it's not what the government PR or the euthanasia lobby wants you to believe.
Unfortunately, euthanasia was proposed to Canadians by the euthanasia lobby as a means to alleviate unwanted suffering. And since most suffering is generally unwanted, there was a captive audience for this proposal. And yet, what is really being suggested is death, eliminating suffering by killing the one who suffers. But if euthanasia is regarded as a compassionate or reasonable means to alleviate suffering, then why wouldn't it be expanded more and more broadly? And that's precisely how we got here. Euthanasia was initially pitched as something for the most extenuating of circumstances. Again, to Alexander Rakin's piece, aptly titled From Exceptional to Routine. But now we know that 1 in 20 deaths in Canada is directly caused by a doctor or nurse administering a lethal injection. And this has become so common and so even attractive to some people that they almost feel like they have to justify why they wouldn't want to go this route. Why would you want a natural death when you could curate your death according to your own terms? But euthanasia is always a tragedy. It's always a defeat. And the request for euthanasia does not so much express the desire to die, so much as it betrays a person's disappointment. I've been paying attention to this issue for the past decade, and one of the things that I appreciate most about our federal government's reporting is that there is an account in the annual federal data of the number one kind of suffering driving people to request euthanasia. And you'll probably be very interested to know that pain and even the fear of pain don't make the top 5 on the list of the kinds of suffering by people's own admission going for it leading to the request. The number one kind of suffering by their own admission is an inability to engage in meaningful life activities. And so it's an existential crisis more than a medical crisis. The second kind of suffering on the list leading people to request MAID is the loss of ability to do the daily activities of personal living, personal care. And after that, we have loss of dignity, loss of independence, and general kind of existential fear about what the future holds, given the trajectory of illnesses and even the frailty and vulnerability that comes naturally with aging. And so, to me, this is such an important issue because it's not just about a narrow medical ethics issue. This is about our culture. This is about the relationship between generations. This is about how we regard life when we are in moments of greatest need and dependency. And for me personally, I don't advocate because I have a feeling of superiority in this topic. No, on the contrary, I don't know if I would be strong in a position of weakness and acute vulnerability. So I need a culture that is pro-life. I need people who would be my advocate in those times. And that's why I'm completely dedicated, while I have my youth and my vigor and my health, to creating a culture where life is the default, because everybody deserves for life to be the default rather than death. And that's what I'm hoping for, that we'll all, as Canadians, be able to get enthused about getting behind.
An existential crisis, loss of dignity, fear of being a burden. That's what is driving this, not unbearable pain or imminent death. And that brings us to the heartbreaking reality that Amanda hears every single day.
Just yesterday, I received a phone call from someone who works in healthcare, and she found out that a colleague is planning to die by euthanasia. And this colleague is someone with whom she worked for many decades, and she was crushed. She called me. It was very late in Ontario, and she's in on the West Coast, and she shared with me how heartrending this was, and how even though she's used to handling people in situations of crisis and meeting people in their need, she felt at such a loss for finding the words to let this person know what this decision would mean, the shockwaves and ripple effect it would have on others. And she said that this woman who's thinking about dying by euthanasia and planning on it has a date scheduled. Her biggest fear is being a burden. And she said, what possibly can we say to someone whose biggest fear in life is that they are burdening others? And one thing that I would encourage is to insist that nothing would burden your loved ones more than your suicide. That is a tragedy that burdens a family like nothing else. This is creating intergenerational grief and complex trauma among all those who I am encountering. It is not an individual autonomous decision made in isolation. It is a decision that makes absolutely every one of us feel more precarious and utterly shattered. So we have to speak the truth. Many times people come up to me and they say, I had no idea there was a counter movement. I didn't even know anyone was pushing back. I thought I had to resign myself that this is the status quo. No, you don't have to accept this. You deserve so much better. And I hope that we can mount some of this affectionate pressure that is genuinely needed, because last thing I'll say is mounting resistance to what is essentially a form of suicidal ideation is always, always an act of love. And you cannot fail when you love others in this way.
And there you have it. Love looks like refusing to let state-sanctioned euthanasia become the default. To connect with Amanda and learn more, visit dyingtomeetyou.com, where she shares powerful vignettes from those most affected and often unheard in the euthanasia debate. For life-affirming care in Canada, head to physiciansforlife.ca, where Amanda is helping form a new generation of medical students and physicians committed to the Hippocratic Oath, practicing with conscience and integrity through conferences and symposia. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. To see more on this file and watch Rebel News' documentary, please go to madedocumentary.com. That's madedocumentary.com.